Okay, categories part two. I was thinking about this some more after the last video, and I think I came up with something, so I wanted to go ahead and record it. We're gonna do a quick recap on what we talked about, or what I talked about in the video last time. So we talked about categories not only being important or a good idea to be able to put things in boxes and things, so we can approach things as a group and not as one-off, and then we have to figure everything out every time. But then not only are they useful and a good idea, but also they're essential. They're essential for the structuring of our not only thoughts, but even our perception. Right? So if we see something and we're trying to find a problem, so maybe we have a business and we're trying to find the bottleneck, or maybe we just came out of a relationship, we're trying to find out what happened, or maybe we have there's some symptoms that we have, and maybe as a doctor might do this, or might even do it yourself. You might think, okay, I have these symptoms. What is it that I have? Okay, so what's important is that we approach any situation like that with a filter, because we can't take the whole world at one time and then filter it. Usually we have a goal, and because of the goal we have certain categories that are important. So if we're looking at a business, perhaps you might think, okay, these are the things that are important in a business, and so those are the things that sort of call your attention, right? But just because, and that's the lens through which you look, but just because that happens, it doesn't mean that you're going to get the right information, because perhaps your categories aren't updated, or they're wrong, or they need to be adjusted somehow. And that's actually the process of living. The process of living every day is to update yourself a little bit and update those categories, hopefully little by little, and you don't have to make major adjustments. But sometimes something happens and you have a really important thing happen, and you have to make a major update, and that's more difficult. Okay, so then we talked about that inside of a human mind. So that's a human mind. And so I said, okay, let's pretend that the human mind was like a box, and inside of this box there's boxes, and each of those boxes is a category. Okay, and this could be as simple as, for example, I like to think about this a lot when talking about marketing. People have a box for every category there is out there. So if you think about, for example, a restaurant that you like to eat at, there's a box that in your head somewhere, so to speak, that says these are the places that I like to eat at. Okay, and then so for another restaurant to come across and to be important in your life, it has to get inside of that category, but that creates a little bit of friction. Might not be a big deal, but it could be. So let's say you go to your favorite restaurant and you have a really bad time. The food is cold, service is terrible, the waiter spills wine on you, whatever. And so that's basically threatened that categorization. So that's why you experience that emotional thing, because not only is it threatening, is maybe a bad time, you're having a bad time, but also it's threatening the very structure of your being in relates to restaurants. Again, not a big deal, but it could be a bigger deal if somebody maybe breaks up with you, or a longtime friend betrays you, or again, categories of friends, categories of lovers, categories of people who are important in your life. That's an important category, and to have to update one of those from one day to the next can cause a lot of friction, a lot of pain. Okay, so there's a lot of that, and you'll basically day to day will kind of adapt, but then you have this friction, and this is what the little squiggly lines between the categories, because to bring one thing out of a category and bring it to another will create a little bit of friction. Inside of a mind, it's not that big of a deal, but then when you have to convince someone else who also has, these are other minds, by the way, who also has categories, well, you expect that there's some kind of overlap between their categories and your categories. As a matter of fact, there has to be overlap, because if not, you couldn't communicate. For example, you have to have, in a category of languages spoken, you prefer to be similar, right? So you can actually communicate. And then more than that, maybe I was talking about accounting yesterday and earlier today. So there are terms in accounting that hopefully both minds agree. Okay, and then maybe you have other people that you have to convince that they have their things, and maybe you have more than that. So now instead of having two people that are trying to decide, okay, not only are we trying to decide what if the overlap is enough for us to communicate, well maybe it is, but now we have different opinions, even on the same underlying structure of language and vocabulary and maybe even company. We work in the same company, but our vision is different. So now we have to negotiate that. And now if you multiply that with 2 or 3 people, and then or maybe 10 or 100 or 1,000, then you have that decrease in productivity, because we have that increased friction not only inside of each mind having to make all the adjustments, but between all the other minds. And then you'll never really understand how somebody's really looking at something. You have to sort of listen to them and kind of imagine what it's like to be in their head. And when you actually do this right, you realize people are very weird, because we are very different from each other. We can see the world completely differently, which it can be a good thing, but it could be a bad thing because, again, friction. And we even came up with, or I came up with, this equation here, which I revised a little bit, about productivity. So I said productivity was something like inversely proportional, so like equals to 1 over P, meaning the number of people, times the category friction. I said, maybe there's some kind of coefficient that we can come up with. And again, I'm not a mathematician. This is just an example of maybe we can boil everything down to the more people that are involved and the more category friction that is involved, the smaller this number is, which means the productivity goes down. Okay? So now, what's important about this, and what the next little piece and the next little bit that I thought was important, was as I was thinking about, okay, so the categories and how we update them, and how the categories become increasingly more and more complex, because the world is complex and increasingly more complex and complicated, which they're not the same thing, but it's basically something. So I thought that there was an opportunity there, and something clicked in my head, like, oh, okay, that's why I do these kinds of things, or oh, that's why that person does these kinds of things. Because if you think about it, so think about it like this. So let's say these are the categories. These are the categories agreed upon by society. Okay, whatever you want to think about maybe this box here, this category is what history is. History. It almost reminds me of like a school schedule. Okay, everything has a box. And then here maybe it's thermodynamics. Thermodynamics. And then here it might be economics. And then here we might have psychology. And of course we have to define what those are, and we have to define what's and that gets complicated. But let's pretend, for the sake of the argument, that we have these agreed upon categories that are social wide or civilization wide. Okay, we have all these little boxes, and of course we have boundaries between the categories, because that's what it's basically by definition. When we say something is in a category, what we're saying is that it's separate from something else. Okay, so let's say we have that. Now what's interesting is that each one of these in our hyper-connected world, each one of these categories is getting more and more complex. Okay? So if you want to be a professional at any of these things, you go really deep on that box. Okay? Because you need to, because it's complicated. There's a lot of information, a lot of different vocabulary, a lot of different paradigms that you have to learn, a lot of different formulas, a lot of different standard operating procedures, a lot of different maybe background and history about the thing that you're getting better at. So the more complicated that each one of these is, the bigger the space, the bigger the gap between one category and the next. Okay? And everybody inside of that group, everybody inside of that system they sort of agree on a lot of things, and maybe other things are different and they need to negotiate. But more or less, they understand the language. But what's interesting is that the more complex, the more separated they get from everybody else, right? So the more complicated psychology becomes, or neuroanatomy, which is something else, or cognitive science, which is something else, or in this case, thermodynamics, economics. You talk about, politics. Good grief, right? Politics. And of course, we can go with. Let's pick another thing. Okay, let's pick engineering. That's a good one. And let's pick law here. Okay, so everybody gets really specialized, and we need to get specialized because it's complicated. So if you know a little bit of each of these, you might not be as well adapted as if you go deep in one. But there's a dark side to it, which comes with an opportunity, and this is what the video is about. So the more involved you get into each one of these, the more separated you become from everyone else. So the opportunity that I see is the communication between these categories. Why? Because very few people are going to be able to dance around categories. Why? Because they're complicated. So you really need to get in there to get a feel. But the downside of getting in there and really understanding a certain category, a certain box that you're going to be a master or have deep domain expertise in, is that you become isolated from the world, and you might not be able to, you might not learn things that actually apply or could update your own category, but that they exist somewhere else. Okay? So this is a big opportunity, because now let's separate the world into two kinds of people. Okay? And again, this is why I always say start with yourself, right? This is why in coaching you should always start with this. This is the crucial part. What kind of person are you? Okay? Now, if you're the kind of person who's had a job for a while and you like the system, you like, for example, my mother, she loves knowing what's going to be going on every day, right? She likes that predictability. She likes to be able to map this out to, okay, this is the way it's going to work, and I'm going to go from here to here, and at this point of the day I should be doing this, and then at this other point of the day I should be doing that, and she kind of likes that, okay? So she's maybe what I would consider like a systems person, okay? So a person that lives inside of one of these categories, okay? Let's do a stick figure. So that's a person, okay? Now, yeah, it's a person. So that's good. But now you have another person who needs to be kind of outside, right? Or at least to be able to go from category to category. Now, the downside is that this person's never going to get really too deep into each one. He just needs to know enough to be able to maybe go from one to the other and update them, okay? So those are the two kinds of people. Figure out which kind of person you are, okay? If you're this kind of a person that you like jumping around, so I'll probably describe you. You've had jobs on and off, but you've never really felt like at home at a job. You kind of feel bored easily. You usually have issues with your bosses. Usually you hate the idea of Mondays. Having to do these kinds of things again. You don't like routines very much. That's that kind of person. Now this person is, I'm not saying this person loves Mondays. Maybe they don't either. But they don't feel that bad about it. They go, well, at least I have a job. They'll think, those kinds of things. Well, at least I know, at least I'll have a steady paycheck or something like that. That's the kind of person, right? Now, both of these people are needed. Okay? This is actually roughly speaking, this is the way political spectrum is divided, okay? This I guess politically speaking is more towards more right wing, more conservative, and this one is a little more left wing, more liberal, okay? And this is actually the very thing. If you look at what's happening in Europe and in a lot of different places with sentiment against, for example, immigrants, because maybe violence or economic reasons. So there's a lot of movements of immigrants, and so a lot of right-wing parties are gaining momentum because they like categories. They like things that are closed. They don't like to open the boundaries. Okay, but if you don't open the boundaries, you don't let new things in that could update the status quo, and then the status quo will get stale and maybe stop working. Okay, but if you just open all the categories and then not have anything, which is what this guy wants to do, then now you can't get anything done because you can't organize it enough to get anything done. So they both need each other. So here's the opportunity. If you are the systems person, you are the guy that or the girl that likes to be inside of this system, and you work really good inside of this system, then learn as much as you can about your system, get as good as you can, and just take a little bit of knowledge from other fields. So you could just maybe grab a book or watch a video or take a course or go to a conference of something outside your sphere. All right, just every once in a while. It's probably not going to be the best experience in the world for you, but you get a little bit of a taste and you might have some creative things. And also get to know a person like this that's outside the category, the guy that's kind of the misfit. For example, entrepreneurs are usually outside because they create categories. Entrepreneurship is more related to artistic creativity than to conscientiousness or even to IQ. Those things are not related. And then so if you're this kind of person, right? I can tell you I'm this kind of a person. So what I needed to do and what really helped me was to get a little more discipline and to really work on trying to put myself in a box, even though I didn't want to be in a box. So I can tell you that my musical education really helped because I really had to really nail it down, just lock it down and learn how to read music, for example. Just sit down and practice for hours and hours and hours. And my free spirit didn't want to do that. Of course, I ended up jumping around from instrument to instrument, which that had its own positives, pros and cons. But anyway, but then I also, that if you're that person who's sort of the outside category, then you need to find a person who likes to be in a category, especially if you're going to start a project. Okay, so if you're going to start a project, you need somebody inside of a category. So like, give you an example. So if you're going to start a business, let's put it here. Okay. You want this business to have a structure. And it doesn't have to be too stiff. Okay, it can be flexible. But what you want is, okay, you're gonna be the guy that sort of establishes, okay, what are we gonna sell, and then who are we selling to, and how are we selling to them? Okay, so that could be, and then you have a system person. So for a lot of entrepreneurs, for example, what I usually advise is get a project manager. Okay, so this is a project manager. Okay, lots of women make really good project managers. Again, this is a little more temperamental. I'm not talking, this isn't, I'm not trying to be biased or anything like that. There's also a lot of creative women, but again, for example, a lot of women are the project managers of the home. They see things that need to get done, and they structure things to get them done, okay? Men, we can be a little bit, and again, this is an overgeneralization. Sometimes is the other way, and there's nothing wrong with that. We can be kind of all over the place and kind of have a mess. And so when we have a mess, all the categories are kind of broken a little bit and kind of sparse and kind of overlapping, right? That's why a desk that is messy can be a little bothersome, because what's happening is the categories are a little bit like the mess I made on this graph. All right, they're just kind of all over the place, but it can help. It can help creativity because things are together that shouldn't be together, and then it's kind of interesting. But we do have to bring some order to them every once in a while, so that we can actually get some work done. Okay, so if you're an entrepreneur, if you're the kind of person who's outside the categories or that likes to jump around, again, if you've been jumping around jobs, jumping around opportunities, not really having fun doing anything, you kind of get bored easily, you kind of want to go and start many projects and not really finishing them, right? That's that person, okay? Now, but if you're this kind of systems person, the person that's in there that really wants to get good at these kinds of things, and really learn and get better, and they kind of get joy from doing it again, and they just get a little bit better, and they get a little bit faster, and they really optimize, that optimization mindset, then you're that kind of person. But again, both types of people are needed. Now, what's interesting is, based on our conversation about productivity, what you want is, if you have too many of these, the project won't go very well, right? Because there will be a lot of friction between the different minds and the categories between them, and trying to organize and making sure that everybody understands what the other person means, and then it becomes a mess. So what you want is to try to keep it small, and I talked about in the previous video about keeping it simple. So let's summarize. So we talked about categories for 2 videos in a row, and about how categories are like these little boxes that we all have that need to get updated, and they're kind of flexible, and they're kind of, if you want to watch that, I think you can scroll down, or if you're watching on LinkedIn, because I'm trying to post these videos on LinkedIn too, then you can go to my Facebook page, because LinkedIn they don't allow but 10-minute videos, and 10-minute videos is not enough time to discuss something like this. But maybe I need to polish it more. So what you want is to try to get good at updating them, but know that you'll have friction every time you're trying to update things. This is why people can't change very quickly. So also one of the reasons that people, for example, a lot of people have a hard time reading, because, or for example, a lot of people have a hard time listening to other people, because when you really listen to somebody, when you really take in the information, you cannot help but be changed a little bit, and that change creates a little bit of an effort, right? Kind of like going to the gym. If you don't feel that effort when you're working out, you're not working out, okay? But it gets tiresome because of the effort. So anyway, so that's what categories are. And then the more complicated each category gets, the deeper you have to go in to understand it, the bigger the gaps between the categories, but then the more opportunity you have to be able to mix a little bit of this. So give you an example here. So this is about it's a little bit about business philosophy. This is about negotiation. This is Howard Schultz, the story of Starbucks after, I think it was 2006 when they had kind of a dip. This is psychology. This is diet. It's like an interesting food book. This is strategy. This is marketing. So I can tell you, I'm that kind of a guy, right? I'm kind of jumping around, but I don't get really deep. So if I want to really dive in and maybe start a business, right, I'm gonna have to get a guy like that to really help me structure things. And I can tell him, look, I have these ideas, and then that guy will be like, okay, well, we're gonna implement them this way, and we're gonna start optimizing them that way. So there's a lot of opportunity in understanding that specialization is making things really separate from each other, which is kind of weird, because where do you draw the line between thermodynamics and history? Right? Okay, yeah, of course there are differences, but where do you draw the line? Where exactly do you draw the line? That's the question, okay? Because there was a development in history where thermodynamics came about. Different theories that described temperature and energy and how they affected matter, okay? And then where do you draw the line between economy and economics and politics? Now that's a hard one, okay? Where do you draw the line? Again, where do you draw it exactly? Well, it's hard, but politics is this hole that you can just go in and never get out. Same thing with economics. But if you're the kind of person that can start tying some things together, you'll start to see things, you'll start to connect dots that most people can't. See you on the next one.